2 years later, in 1975, Black Sabbath released their last album with definitive classic Sabbath songs, and it was called Sabotage. The previous album, in terms of this album, can be considered pulling a soft parade, but the album is also dominated by a keyboard. This album was released 2 years after Sabbath Bloody Sabbath because Tony was beginning to become more and more obsessed with studio production, according to Ozzy. The album itself is pretty decent. On side 1 there is Hole in the Sky and Symptom of the Universe. I also like Don't Start Too Late because it reminds me of Master of Reality. Well, sort of. It reminds me of Sabbath Bloody Sabbath synthesizers and Master of Reality's interludes. The album itself is alright, but again, it's an extension of Black Sabbath's initial decline. It doesn't really have the feeling of oneness and classicness that the previous albums had. It doesn't seem as coherent as Paranoid or Master of Reality, but it is a passable album nonetheless. 1976 saw the release of one of Sabbath's more lackluster albums, Technical Ecstasy. I really don't want to slam this album because it is from the original Sabbath era, but here is what I truly think when I compare this album to Sabbath's first.
People running 'cause they're scared.
Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. Everything that's wonderful is what I feel when...
Okay, yeah, that was a bit harsh. But seriously, the harsh undertones and the darkness seem to float away at this point in time. I mean, you do have pretty catchy songs such as It's Alright on side 1 and Rock and Roll Doctor and Dirty Women on side 2. But really, the sound here is pretty generic, and it doesn't sound like Sabbath at all. Although I can fairly say that this stuff is better than from the Dio era, which we will get to later. So the album gets an average rating from me. I would downgrade it to below average, but hey, it's original Sabbath we're talking here. Black Sabbath's last album with the original 4 members was released in 1978, and it was titled Never Say Die. The album is slightly better than Technical Ecstasy, but the album itself is, again, not the representative of Sabbath's signature style. You do have some catchy songs on here, such as the title song Never Say Die, and maybe even Junior's Eyes with a side of Air Dance. I also want to add It's a Hard Road because I just like it. It's dominated by those same keyboards and silly crap again, and Tony Iommi's guitar is in this appears so downgraded. Still, you cannot scoff at this album. It was Sabbath's last gasp, and it would be Sabbath's last classic album before Ozzy got fired in 1979 for drinking and not attending sessions. In fact, before Never Say Die, Ozzy left the band to work alone, but returned in time to record Never Say Die. Overall, the album is also average, but keep in mind, Sabbath was on the brink of implosion, and it was their last hurrah in terms of their production and arrangement. Now, this is when the throwback becomes more of a rant than a throwback. Get ready for some tirading. Here is where the Sabbath history gets ugly. Now, as I mentioned before, Ozzy was fired in 1979 because he was being reckless, so Sabbath needed a new vocalist. Sure enough, they find Ronnie James Dio working for Rainbow. And hey, they had Deep Purple's guitarist Ritchie Blackmore, so Dio must be good, right? Well, the next album clearly states the answer. In 1980, Black Sabbath with Dio released the album Heaven and Hell. Aside from the title song, I can't think of any other song from this album that is of high regard. Does anyone know Children of the Sea or Neon Nights? Do any of these songs remind you of Iron Man or Fairies Wear Boots or After Forever? I mean, Bill Ward left after this album, so there goes the excellent drum playing you heard several albums before, and Geezer Butler was on the brink of leaving. Thank God somebody decided to take the post of keyboardist. And why are there keyboards? If their aim was being dark and everything, why should keyboards embellish the song? It's the famous Van Halen question. What do you want to hear? Eddie's wonderful guitar playing or Eddie's wonderful keyboarding skills? I guess only you can be the judge of that. And from Heaven and Hell, the album quality quickly deteriorates. By Mob Rules in 1981, Bill Ward's already gone, and it doesn't sound like Sabbath at all. It sounds like a generic metal band. Ozzy called the lineup Geezer and the Three Wops, and if you're Italian, I apologize for the racial slur, but hey, that was Ozzy, and those were his brutal words. And after Mob Rules, with the release of Born Again in 1983, we have Deep Purple's Ian Gillan on vocals, which would sound great, right? In this case,
No.
the quality is very lackluster. I mean, Bill Ward returned only because the replacement drummer wanted to work for Dio, and the songs on there are bland and dull. And one song is rumored to trash Sharon Osbourne, Ozzy's wife. Yeah, I think in that case, they were playing with fire. Also, Geezer left the band by the end of Ma Rules because, well, Ozzy and Bill left. So basically, the original Black Sabbath paralleled the sad demise of Deep Purple. Ironic, right? They had some great hits, but in their decline they changed up the band lineup God knows how many times, and just became redundant. Dio-era Sabbath was much less organized and less cohesive than the original Sabbath gang was. The only reason why interest was generated in Sabbath was because of their original repertoire of songs, and that's about it. No one would have paid any attention to the latter years of Sabbath if Sabbath hadn't established a groundwork to begin with. Now, the reason that I am comparing earlier Sabbath to later Sabbath is based off what happened in 2006. Osbourne, back in 2006, sued Tony Iommi because Ozzy believed that he illegally claimed the band name. Iommi states that he was the only member of the band who has not left and remained committed throughout the lineup changes, so he should deserve more credit. Now, I'm not going to give a formal opinion about this, as you can decide for yourself who deserves the credit. Tony Iommi was in the band for 40 years, but the only reason why the band became famous was because of the other three, and Ozzy was fired from his post in 1979, triggering 2 desertions and 1 return. In the end, it's all up to the philosophers to debate this one, but I think the best way to illustrate this conflict is to look at Ozzy-era Sabbath and Dio and Gillan-era Sabbath, so that we can not only see the progression of the band, but see Tony's true motivations to keep Black Sabbath moving. For now, I'll just say that Sabbath after Ozzy was only triggered because Sabbath started out with Ozzy, Tony, Geezer, and Bill. The later stuff is inferior compared to Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Master of Reality, or Volume 4, and with all those changes the band declined. Black Sabbath was and still is the original heavy metal pioneer. Without them, we would not have current metal groups and alternative styles. There wouldn't have been Nirvana or any other metal groups, or alternative groups for that matter. From 1970 to 1978, they were the metal gods. Now they are watching their success from afar, knowing that they changed the musical genre. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Youngblood Fantasy 92, and I'll see you next time.